Okay, we're going to get started tonight with our Q&A. This has been a fantastic week here. We have been doing a lot of fun things. We've been working in the greenhouse. The light is penetrating through the greenhouse nicely at this time of year. We're getting a lot of growth. About the time that February comes along, we get over 10 hours of light. If you have under 10 hours of light from the sun in the winter greenhouse, the plants don't grow very much. But in the beginning of February, we get 10 hours of light, but February is still so cold that we don't get a lot of growth. So once March gets here, things seem to really take off and grow. So that has been fun to see things start growing like crazy. So we have all kinds of spinach, lettuce, green onions, kale, collards, Chinese cabbage, carrots. Carrots are fun because they're starting to go to seed at this time of year. So what we need to do is dig them soon before they shoot up and go to seed, because then the center of the carrot gets really hard. Okay, we're going to get going and tell a story tonight. I am going to I'm gonna push a button here and I'm gonna stop my share for a minute. Type in the chat where you guys are from. It's always interesting to know. I think I know where people are from, but sometimes we have new people and I don't know where people are from, and it's always fun to know. I'm from Clover Valley, Nevada, which is in the Humboldt Mountains in northern Nevada. We're only about an hour's drive from the Idaho border and an hour's drive from the Utah border. So we're up there in the mountains, lots of sagebrush flats around, and we have had a lot of snow because we're at 6,000 feet where we live. I think we're at 5,800 exactly right here where the house is. And so that's pretty fun. So we've got South Dakota and Iowa. That's fantastic. That's good. And this does get recorded and we put it on YouTube so that people can watch and learn and grow, so we can help you have the very best garden of your entire life. So I teach a lot of classes, and we just barely started doing these Q&As last year. We're getting close to 1 year of doing these on Thursday nights. So it's kind of a new thing. And it's fun. We have quite a few people watching the YouTubes, so that's been good. But tonight I wanted to talk about my boot camp class a little bit and just tell you an experience that I've had with a lady who came to it was the very first boot camp I taught a couple of years ago, because the boot camps are basically a new thing too. But I have been teaching gardening classes for almost 20 years. And a lady named Debbie came to my boot camp class a couple of years ago. It was in the springtime. It was the last week of April, right before May, because the first week of May is when everybody puts their gardens in. That's not true, but that's the thing that we think in the world. You know, May is the gardening month. And it was fun because she came. She was 67 years old. And her goals were to learn how to plant a garden and grow a garden in such a way that she could enjoy gardening and it wasn't so much work, because she was worried about her age. She's blind in one eye, so she has some struggles. And she wanted to save money. She really wanted to focus on quality food. She wanted to focus on the flavor of the food, and she wanted it to be super nutritious so that she could stay healthy. And she wanted to have a big garden. She lives on a small acreage, and she wanted her garden to be 1 or 2 acres. And so this huge garden for a lady who's approaching, past middle age. And her husband wanted a garden too, but he wanted a garden that was 12 feet by 14 feet, or maybe 12 by 20. And so it was fun, and they both came and enjoyed the boot camp class. And the boot camp class was 3 days. and we talked a lot about soil science, soil health, and we did mostly hands-on. We planted seeds, we mixed potting soil, we created a couple of gardens while they were here, and we showed people how to just grow food. So the class was meant for people who didn't know anything about growing food, so a complete beginner, or somebody who has been growing food in a way that was more traditional, where you would rototill the garden and then you would spread fertilizer, you would put transplants in the ground and that kind of thing. So we did it very different because we didn't till anything up. We just took cardboard and put it on the lawn on the side of my house. And then we brought in compost and put on top of the cardboard. And so this was a different thing for a lot of the people who attended. I think I had 15 attendees at that particular boot camp. And they, some of them were worried, and they said, well, how are these plants going to grow if we don't till it up? And how are we going to get rid of the cardboard that's under there now that the plants are growing on it? And so we had a lot of fun questions, you know. And of course, you don't get rid of the cardboard. It feeds the fungus. And so it becomes a fertilizer. And the plants grow down and the roots go right through it. And so we answered all the questions that people had. And it was fun. And people enjoyed it. Well, Debbie went home. And she started sending me pictures from her garden. And she sent me a picture and said, do you know what these plants are? And she had some beautiful plants that were coming up. They looked like cucumbers or cantaloupes or something. It was kind of hard to tell from the picture, but we figured out what they were. And she said, I reminded her, I said, well, in boot camp, I taught you how to write a tag and put tags in so you'd remember. And she said, oh, well, I had a phone call when you were doing that part. And I remember she had like an hour-long phone call, something she had to do. So she wasn't there. She said, but I did put a tag in and I wrote on it, but the marker that I wrote on it with came off. And I said, yeah, that's right. Because what I taught in boot camp was you need to use a number 2 pencil, just a plain old number 2 pencil on those plastic tags, because it will stay there through rain and hail and snow. I mean, I've found those in the garden that have been out there for a couple of years and they were lost, and you can still read what it said. But if you take your finger and just rub on it with a little bit of moisture, the number 2 pencil comes off. And so you can reuse the tags. And the number 1 thing I think that kills those tags and the marker coming off is the sunlight. And it fades that marker, but a number 2 pencil won't fade in the sunlight. And so she was all excited about that. She said, oh, that's what I'll do. This is fantastic. And then she sent me more pictures, and she sent me pictures of her compost pile. And she had this great big compost pile, the size that we make. No, in context, because some compost piles are huge, like acres big. But the one that I taught them to build at boot camp was in a wire cage. It's about 4 feet across and about 5 feet tall. And she had her wire cage built, and she had it really tall. And then a few weeks later, she sent me another picture, and it had shrunk down to less than half that size, and it was the perfect color. And she said that it was smelling great. So she had these fun pictures. And in that picture, she had 2 compost piles. She had a second one going that was filled up. So that was pretty incredible that she was doing all this work. And then later on, she started sending me pictures of her harvest. And she had all these different vegetables and small fruits like strawberries and other things that were growing. And she ended up with all kinds of tomatoes and melons. And she planted fruit trees. She sent me pictures of all the natural fungus that was blooming, meaning mushrooms, were coming up in her lawn. Because we had talked about that in our soil health portion of the boot camp. And she was super excited, saying, my soils must be healthy because I have all these mushrooms. I'm like, yes, that's right. So she was so excited about all the stuff that she had learned. and she kept sharing with me, which was fun. It was super fun to hear all this. And then later on, she had her dehydrator going, and she was dehydrating food because she was growing a lot more than she could eat. So she was drying it and putting it in freezers and bottles and all that stuff. So that was pretty incredible and pretty awesome, to be able to interact with her after she had gone home from the class, to see her success. And then she went on a trip and she was gone. And then she told me, when she was going on the trip, she said, I sent my husband out to pick the strawberries, and he went out there and he was looking around and he said there weren't any. And so it was pretty funny. So I started wondering, because over the years, sometimes I've had to be a marriage counselor a little bit when it comes to gardening. So that's pretty funny, because a lot of times husbands and wives don't agree very good on what the garden should be. So their garden certainly ended up a lot bigger than 12 by 20, which is what Debbie's husband wanted. And anyway, it's been fun. So she did tell me that her husband really loved the strawberries. He would love to eat them, because she'd go out and pick them all, and she'd bring them in, and she would fix them somewhere. I'm not sure if she just sliced them or if they put cream on them. I don't remember, but she had a certain way of fixing them, and he would love to eat them. And so he didn't want her to go on that trip that she went on, because he wouldn't have strawberries. And so she said, well, you can go pick all the strawberries you want. But once she left, he couldn't find any, which I thought was pretty funny. Either the season was over or he didn't look very hard. I don't know. And I'm at risk, because they're probably going to watch this video. And so I might be in trouble for telling this, for telling all these things. But it was pretty great. But I just wanted to share this because it's so fun to see somebody who is concerned and worried about saving money on gardens, because a lot of times people will plant a garden and then they spend more money doing things in the garden than the food they got out of it. And that can be a real problem for people. I've known people who have gone out and they bought a $500 rototiller and a whole bunch of other tools. And by the end of the gardening season, they added up and they spent like $900 or maybe even $1,200. And then they harvested maybe $75 worth of food. And their whole purpose for gardening was to save money. And so they get really discouraged about that. And so it was fun to work with Debbie and show her the efficiencies that we were able to do. You don't even need a rototiller. And one guy said, well, I just bought a rototiller. And I said, well, good. It's new, so you can get a good price for it when you sell it, because you don't need one anymore. And that saves a lot of work. And there's a lot of things that we do in gardening that we don't really have to do. And our gardens actually work better if we don't do some of the things that traditionally we have been doing. And it makes it a lot easier. And for Debbie, being 67 years old, she was worried about her health. She was worried about being able to do the work. And after coming to boot camp, we showed her that she can have a pretty good sized garden and still be able to do all these things. And so she learned how to do it. Her and her husband went home, and they were able to accomplish this, and they had a wonderful harvest. And they did have high quality food, which was one of her main goals, because she was worried about going to the store. And she looks at all the stuff at the store thinking, well, I would buy this, but I know that they use a lot of pesticides for certain things. Like strawberries is one of the things that a lot of pesticides are dumped on strawberries in some of the commercial agriculture. Not all of it. You can find strawberries that are pretty clean, but sometimes they do have problems with being sprayed a lot. And so people worry about that. The consumers do worry about these things. So she was so excited because she didn't have to worry about that, because she was growing her own. And she built her own little greenhouse. I mean, how many 67-year-olds are out there, building greenhouses? But she was able to do that, which was fantastic. And the nutrition I think she was super happy to know that she was eating the best and the most nutritious food, because not all food is created equal. If you grow food in one way, it doesn't have the same nutrition as if you grow it in another way. So there are ways to grow food that will maximize the nutrition in the food. And we went through that in the classes and showed which ways to grow food actually produce the best nutrition and which ways will grow maybe a big crop, but when you do nutrition tests on the food, they're missing nutrients that we could be having. So it was just super fun to have Debbie share her garden with me over the last couple of years since she came to boot camp. And I just wanted to share this with you today for our discussion. And we can go ahead and get into the questions. So if you brought questions tonight, we can answer your questions to help you have the very best garden in the whole world. Clint wrote in here, my grandkids are the #1 remover of my markers. That's great. That's good. Yeah, that I think Debbie's husband did eat the strawberries. Clint mentioned that in the here. I bet he ate the strawberries, so he probably did. I'm going to go to my share screen real quick here. I just have this to point out. So these are the 9 ways that I like to help people grow food. And then we're going to open this up for questions. But my website is down here in the bottom left corner, georgicrevolution.com. So you can go there to find if I can help you to grow your garden. That is my purpose in life. So I do have a YouTube. I have the weekly Q&A, which is what this is. You can go to my Patreon channel, and I have a lot of videos showing you how to do fun things in the greenhouse. And I can do soil testing for you in my laboratory. My book is almost done. It'll be ready, I think, maybe in a week. And you will get that information in my newsletter. So if you do not receive my newsletter, go to www.georgicrevolution and sign up. It's just there on the front page. You can click there and put your email in there, and then you'll get information from me about all these fun things. And of course, boot camp. I have a 3-day boot camp coming up in a matter of weeks. It's actually a month away, but it'll be coming up soon. And I also do consulting. And so if you want to be trained as a farmer, as a career, I have my 17-week boot camp as well. And I have room for 1 more male student. And the reason I'm saying male, because in today's world, we probably go to jail for stuff like that, but we separate the male and female students by housing. And I have a male roommate that needs a room with 2 beds. So we have room for 1 more boy. And here's the dates for my spring boot camp: April 27, 28, 29. And that is here on site in my garden, in my greenhouse. And I try to teach you everything to make gardening easier for you. And of course, if you want to do the 17-week class, get me your application ASAP, and we can get you signed up for that. And all that information is on my website. Okay, so let's do Q&A. I actually got a question on my my Facebook. So I'm going to try to go to Facebook real quick. I'm going to open that up and find this. And we'll do that one first, and then we'll have you guys talk to me, or you can type it in the chat or whatever. But this is from Shannon, and she says, hello, I'm not able to be in person tonight, but I do have questions. I have been using Mittleiter method for a few years, and each year is more discouraging. I feel like I'm fertilizing the weeds more than my plants, and so discouraging. Okay, so she has some more questions, but let's stop and let's talk about that one really quick. So the Mittleiter method is all based on inputs to the soil. So my whole theory and my whole method of gardening is kind of the opposite of that. I don't add anything to the soil except for compost. So I'm not against the Mittleider method. It's not a bad method. It's actually a very useful and good method while you're getting your soil from a place where it won't grow food to a place where you have a really healthy soil. For instance, if you were in a desert area or a place that simply won't grow food, the Mittleider method could be a really good thing to do for 2 or 3 years while you are making your soil function. And what it means to make your soil function is to add the microbes that are beneficial for making the plant food. Okay, so the sand, silt, and clay in the soils pretty much everywhere, all over the earth, they have all the nutrients that plants need to grow plants. But bacteria and fungus are needed in high quantities. And we're talking about the good bacteria and fungus, not bad ones, but the good ones. They're needed in high quantities to melt down the sands, silts, and clays into the plant food that the plants need. And once you get your soil to that point, then you never have to buy any input again. And an input means anything you purchase to put on the land. Now, when you think about this, look at the most beautiful place you see in Mother Nature, where nobody's involved. The most beautiful forest or the most beautiful grassland or wherever. Nobody's out there adding fertilizers or spraying for anything or doing anything. They're simply, people are simply ignoring that, but it's growing wonderful. So what we want to do with our soil is to get it to a point where we don't have to put in any inputs at all. This usually takes about 3 to 5 years. And once you get 3 to 5 years into this, then you don't have to add fertilizers anymore. So here's what happens when you use lots of fertilizers and lots of inputs, kind of like the Mittleider method. When you do that every year, the soils can get out of balance and the microbes stop growing that would naturally do the right thing in the soil. And it can make your plants not do as well every year. So I think that's probably what's happening to you, Shannon, is by using this method every year over and over and over again, the microbes don't have to grow anymore because the plants are simply taking up the nutrients, and so they're not helping the microbes grow, because plants do help microbes grow. So hopefully that you could understand that, but let's keep going with the rest of your question here. Also have quite clay soil living in Southwest Virginia. And what I just said works with any soil type. So adding all that good compost helps with any soil type. So it'll work for you in Virginia for sure. Maybe you need more information about what types of weeds. Not really. Because fertile soils will grow your plants super good, adding the compost. And so it doesn't really matter which species of weeds there are. We live in Blue Ridge Mountains with lots of forest trees. I also have a compost pile from last year's garden cleanup, but not sure about using it since a lot of things are growing on it now. I would go ahead and spread that whole thing over your gardens. That's good because you need to build up your organic matter on top of the soil, especially since it has a lot of clay in it. I also have a greenhouse with raised beds built with 2x8 boards. That's good. If you ever have problems with slugs or snails, they love to live on the sides of those between your soil and where the boards are. So that's something to watch out for. Homemade soil using wood shavings and sand. It's quite composted, but I do have issues with blight or some sort of fungal disease in one box where I grow my tomatoes. Usually the blights and things go away once you get your soil microbiology to a state where it needs to be. We really only see the bad diseases in plants when you're using a lot of man-made inputs to put in the soil. So hopefully those hints helped you. If not, you're welcome to ask more questions for next week or clarify anything if you feel like I left something out, and I would be happy to answer more questions for you. Okay. Lindsay wrote, we have an abundance of cow manure from December through January feeding areas. How would you suggest using it? So Lindsay, anytime you have fresh manure like that, I love to take that, and you have different options. You could do a thermophilic compost, which is when you pile it up and you let it get super hot, and then you're turning it every few days until it cools off. So, and that there's kind of a technical way of doing that. If you want to do that, you need more information than what I just told you. So we could go into that. The easier way to do it that takes longer is if you put it in a shallow pile that's less than 2 feet thick. And so you could pile it up maybe a long strip, and then add a bunch of earthworms to it and keep a sprinkler on it throughout the summer so it stays moist, and then the earthworms will decompose it for you. So those are 2 methods that you could use. The reason you're going to make it shallow and not a big pile is because that way it will, the oxygen will penetrate into it and it won't go anaerobic. Because anaerobic means no oxygen. So a big pile, it's going to lose oxygen in the center, and then it could grow the disease-causing organisms that can hurt your plants. And so that's why you would keep it shallow. So that's what I suggest. The other way, if you feel like you needed some of it now on some kind of a field or something, you can spread it right now as fresh manure. But I would spread it very thin, like 1/2 inch or whatever, anywhere you're going to be using that. So I always like to compost fresh manure first before I use it. So anyway, those are some ideas. Okay, do we have any other questions tonight? You can unmute, you can type it in the chat, whatever you want. We've got Clint, we've got Hannah and Ron, and somebody on a Samsung device. If you guys have a question, you can go ahead and ask. Don't be shy.
There we go. Okay, now I think I got it on. Something that I haven't heard you talk too much about, and that is collecting water on your property. I haven't looked into it a huge amount. I have an idea it's better to have a space that's on your highest elevation, so that way you can have it gravity fed to where you want it to go. But what kind of options are there? I mean, you could probably dig a hole and try to get it to fill up. I don't know what kind of ideas you have.
Yeah, if you have an acreage, where you could build a pond, that'd be fantastic. If you have a place where water's running in, that'd be really good. If you don't have very much land, then you could always have barrels or water tanks and catch water off of the roofs, your downspouts that are coming down off of any building, things like that. You could always build an underground cistern like they did back in the old days. That gets kind of expensive, but it's an option. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's all I know about that.
Okay, all right.
All right, anything else from anybody else? Don't be shy. This is your moment. I've been farming for 50 years. That's not true, because I'm just turning 50 this year. So maybe 48 years. Do my first 10 years count? I think they do. Okay, we have a question here in the chat. I'll read it. We don't have compost started yet, but we have cattle lots that have piles in them that are very old, shoved up piles of hay / manure. Would that be any good to put on top of our cardboard getting started? Yes, absolutely it would. It's a very good detritus. It's probably pretty well decomposed. A couple of things to keep in mind. Since I'm assuming you have a tractor because you have cattle lots with manure piles pushed up, so you must have pushed them up with something. So take your front end loader of your tractor and stick that pile, or if you have a backhoe, you can just dig a big gouge in it with a backhoe or whatever, but try to get up to the middle of the pile in at least 4 or 5 feet and grab a couple of handfuls of that and smell the material and see what it smells like. Because soil that has, or compost or soil, it's the same for both. If it has a bad smell, a bad odor, then that means it is anaerobic. It's in an anaerobic state, which means low oxygen. And low oxygen is when your disease organisms are growing. So if you take it in that state of having a bad odor, then there's a chance that if you put it around plants that are alive right now, it could actually cause a disease in the plant, depending on what is, what organisms are growing in there. But if it has a nice, sweet smell, if it smells really good, then it is full of oxygen, and there's probably no diseases that are going to hurt any plants. All right, so keep that in mind. Now, you did say, would it be a good material to start on top of your cardboard? Absolutely, it would. It would be fantastic to put on top of your cardboard because oxygen will penetrate into a pile 1 foot. So if you put on about 6 to 8 inches on top of your cardboard, that will give you a really good garden bed. And if you do it early, maybe like 4 to 8 weeks before you plant, so gardening season is coming, so I would go ahead and get that done as soon as possible. If you have a lot of snow on the ground still, like I do, you might want to wait. But put that old cow manure on top of the cardboard, 6 to 8 inches thick, and then just let it sit there. And what you will find is within 6 or 8 weeks from now, if it does have a bad smell, that smell will go away. And at least it should. And the reason it'll go away is because the oxygen will start to feed the aerobic organisms, and then they will start doing their thing, and they will outcompete the bad disease-causing anaerobic organisms. Hopefully all these big words aren't like confusing you. But yes, so you can use it that way for sure. In fact, it's fantastic to use that way. And you're lucky that you have some manure piles you can use. So if you go in there and you dig through it and it smells really bad, don't throw it away. It's still worth a lot. It's great. Just don't put it around plants that are growing while it still smells bad. You just need to spread it out so that oxygen can get to it, and then put it around plants. Okay, hopefully that helps. Okay, any more questions? You're welcome to unmute or type into the chat. We do have another question in the chat. I have too much wild onion grass taking over a bigger than wanted section of the horse pasture. I don't believe it's bad for our herd, but would like to maximize the pasture grasses. Also, way more nightshade. Is it poisonous? Yes, nightshade is poisonous. And some nasty thistle. Any suggestions besides mowing? We're not wanting to use herbicides. Yeah, just keep that stuff mowed down. That's the best thing. If you could incorporate a couple of different kind of animals in there with your horses, that'd be good. Like if you could get some goats in there, they're going to eat some of those things, and even sheep will eat those things, some of those weeds. They like them. And so that'd be great. I don't know that I've never heard you talk about that, Clint, if you had any other animals, but other than your horses, it's all I've heard you mention. But I'm sure there's somebody around with some goats and sheep. The only problem with goats and sheep is you may not have fences that will keep them in. And then if they get out of your pasture, that might make your neighbors mad and all that. Because sheep will get out pretty easy, and goats will get out even easier because they will jump higher than a sheep. So those are things to think about. But yeah, the nightshade is poisonous. The most poisonous part of it are the little berries that it grows after it, after it flowers and blooms. So you may have to get out there by hand and just pick those out, which doesn't sound fun if it's a giant pasture, but that's probably the best thing to do. And then you want to just control those noxious weeds by get your horses rotating in a tight group and start moving them a lot around there, every day. So, I don't know if you've been on any of these classes when I talked about the rotational grazing, where you would take a large herd of animals in a small, a small area, so that they're eating pretty much everything down in one day, and then you move them, and then you don't come back to that area where they ate it down until the grass has grown back and has at least 3 leaves on it. So you want to go back and look and see. So you can divide your pasture up into like 10 paddocks or whatever, but don't bring your horses back in to that area until your grass has 3 leaves. Because if it only has 2 leaves and they keep eating it that way, it'll kill out your stand of grass. So there are some things to think about. All right. If we have any more questions, ask them now. If not, we can go ahead and close this down, and we will see you next week.
You're actually hearing Hannah's husband here. I was the one that typed in about the manure.
Okay.
So when we're getting started with that, is it as simple as, where we're planning on putting our garden, it's sod right now. It's part of a yard. Do we just go cover that up with cardboard and go dig that stuff up and spread it out over the top of it and let it sit for a while if it has that nasty smell? And I think I know what you're talking about when you say that, because a lot of times it'll be a real dark black color when it has that nasty smell and stuff like that. But I just didn't know, is that the way to go about it, right on top of the sod, and just go from there?
Yes, you want to make your cardboard really thick, and then so like 2 or 3 layers. Make sure you don't have any cracks in the cardboard. Overlap it good, so that what's growing, where your grass is, you don't want those plants coming up through it at all. And the other thing about those manure piles, and you said it, was the black color. If you have a black color to that, it means at some point it has been anaerobic and it will turn it black. A good compost should be dark brown, but not black. Anytime you see that black material, you have anaerobic conditions that will kill plants, and that can even poison animals too, and make people sick. So,
right, yeah, and it's not like any of this was ever stirred or anything like that. It's just where it had been shoved up, and then there's even been bale rings put up on top of those piles, so they just kind of added to it over time. And so yeah, it created a good anaerobic condition. When it was really wet, is just saturated muck basically. So yeah, we definitely had some of that.
Yeah. So when you dig into it now, just realize if it does smell good, that even if it has turned black, if it smells good, it is it's aerobic at this point, because the cycle of the compost, when you do that, when you pile it up, it's aerobic for maybe 4 or 5 days. Then it goes anaerobic, and it will stay anaerobic for months, maybe 6 months or even a year. And then the anaerobes die off and the whole thing can go aerobic again. And at that point, you can use it without any problem. So it just depends how old it is. So if you stuck your front end loader in it and it's still really rank smelling, if you wanted to, you could just leave it for another year, and in another year, it probably would be good to use. But like I said, you can use it now. Just make sure that it airs out good, being only about 6 inches thick, until the smell goes away, and then plant in it, and you should be fine.
And then another question about cardboard. I don't know if anybody's ever asked this. What about cardboard that's like printed on that like has like the like completely colored? Is that something that you shouldn't use, or is that still okay?
Yeah, so people ask me that all the time. And in my soil laboratory, I have never seen that colored cardboard cause a problem with beneficial microbes. So I think you can use it fine. I mean, but there's a lot of people on Facebook and gardening places that say never use it because it'll kill your microbes. But I've never actually seen that happen. But you know, if for some reason you're worried about it or whatever, just don't use it. You know. But I've never seen
Right.
it is a problem. And I think the reason it's not a problem is because almost all inks nowadays, and for sure the commercial inks, are made out of soybeans, and they're a soy product. So they just the fungus in the that's in your soil, the beneficial fungus, will just eat that as a food source, and they just decompose it. So
Very good. Thank you.
you bet. All right. Okay, I think we had a good time, unless somebody else has one more question. Okay, same time next week. We'll be here again. And good night, everyone.